The galactic celebration lasted exactly 3 days before reality set in, and everyone realized that eliminating the Void Swarm had created a power vacuum that would reshape civilization throughout known space. Ambassador Ray stood before the reformed Galactic Council in chambers that had been rebuilt on Earth, rather than the traditional neutral territory that had hosted diplomatic meetings for centuries. The message she delivered was simple, direct, and completely non-negotiable. Humanity had saved the galaxy from total destruction, but Earth would not be returning to its previous status as an ignored newcomer on the periphery of civilized space. Human interests would now be protected by the same systematic efficiency that had eliminated the swarm, and any species that threatened those interests would face the full capabilities of human military technology. The terms of the new galactic order were presented as facts rather than proposals, subject to debate or modification. Species that had secretly collaborated with the swarm would face human justice administered through military tribunals that operated according to human legal principles rather than traditional council procedures. Planets that had refused to support the war effort would pay reparations calculated to fully compensate for the resources humans had expended, saving civilizations that had been unwilling to save themselves. Director Jung established the Human Colonial Authority, with headquarters on 12 different worlds throughout what had previously been considered neutral territory. The HCA would oversee settlement of former swarm-controlled regions while ensuring that human colonies received priority access to the most valuable planets and resource deposits that had been liberated during the war. The galaxy discovered that humans were as efficient at building civilization as they had been at destroying enemies. Human engineering teams could terraform barren worlds in decades rather than the centuries required by traditional methods. They used techniques that other species considered environmentally destructive, but which produced results that could not be argued with. General Tay commanded occupation forces on 17 worlds that had previously served as swarm staging areas. His soldiers established military bases designed to support extended deployment throughout the galaxy, while human civilians began arriving to establish permanent settlements in regions that offered strategic or economic advantages. The expansion was not technically conquest because humans did not need to fight battles against organized resistance. Instead, they simply moved into areas that were either uninhabited or controlled by species that lacked the military capability to prevent human settlement. The process was systematic, thorough, and completely legal according to salvage laws that humans had researched extensively before beginning their expansion. Admiral Yuna established naval bases in star systems that provided strategic control over major shipping routes, while human merchant fleets began offering transportation and trade services that gradually made other species dependent on human economic networks. The services were reliable, efficient, and competitively priced, but they also gave humans detailed information about every aspect of galactic commerce and industry. Dr. Mina opened research facilities on worlds that offered unique scientific opportunities, while human companies began extracting resources using methods that maximized efficiency rather than environmental preservation. The galaxy learned that human industrial capacity could be scaled up to levels that dwarfed the combined output of all other known civilizations when resource extraction was organized according to human principles. But the most significant change was psychological rather than political or economic. Every species in the galaxy now understood that their continued existence depended on avoiding conflicts with humans who possessed weapons and strategies capable of eliminating entire civilizations if they determined that such elimination served human interests. The Corvan military attempted to reassert control over their traditional sphere of influence, only to discover that human forces had established permanent bases throughout their territory during the war against the swarm. When Corvan commanders demanded the removal of human military installations, Admiral Soon explained that the bases were necessary to prevent future threats from emerging in regions where previous conflicts had demonstrated inadequate local defensive capabilities. The Alterian government protested human settlement of worlds that had been designated as protected cultural sites under previous council agreements. Ambassador Chris responded by providing detailed intelligence records showing that Alterian officials had been negotiating secret agreements with swarm representatives during the war. The evidence included communication logs proving that the Alterians had offered to provide human colony locations in exchange for promises that their homeworld would be spared from attack. The revelation destroyed any remaining moral authority that traditional council species claimed over galactic affairs. If the galaxy's most respected civilizations were willing to betray their allies to save themselves, then they had no standing to criticize human methods or question human decisions about post-war territorial arrangements. Lieutenant Hay commanded security forces that investigated collaboration between various species and swarm forces during the 300-year war. The investigations revealed a pattern of secret negotiations and betrayals that explained why conventional military strategies had failed so completely. Many council members had been more concerned with preserving their own civilizations than achieving victory against the common enemy. The evidence was presented to galactic media outlets through information networks that humans had established during their expansion across former swarm territory. Unlike traditional council-controlled news services, human media organizations reported facts without diplomatic filtering or political censorship. The galaxy learned uncomfortable truths about their leaders and their own willingness to sacrifice others for personal survival. Captain Min established training programs for alien military officers who wanted to learn human tactical methods. The programs were open to any species willing to adopt human approaches to strategic planning and resource allocation. Students learned that effective warfare required abandoning traditional concepts of honor and fighting to achieve complete victory, regardless of cost or moral considerations. The training was voluntary, but species that refused to participate found themselves increasingly isolated as human influence expanded throughout the galaxy. Military alliances required compatible strategic doctrines, and most alien approaches to warfare had been proven ineffective against any serious threat. Only human methods had achieved decisive results when galactic survival was at stake. Major Yoon commanded reconstruction efforts in star systems that had been devastated during the war against the swarm. Human engineering teams rebuilt infrastructure, using designs that prioritized function over aesthetic considerations, while human economists established trade relationships that gradually integrated local economies into human-controlled commercial networks. The reconstruction was genuinely beneficial for populations that had suffered under swarm occupation, but it also created dependencies that made independence from human influence practically impossible. Planets that relied on human technology and human trade could not risk conflicts that might result in the withdrawal of services their populations needed for survival. The galaxy realized that humanity had achieved something that no previous galactic power had accomplished. They had established control not through conquest or intimidation, but by making themselves indispensable to the continued functioning of interstellar civilization. Every species now depended on human military protection, human economic services, or human technological assistance. Colonel Bora presented strategic assessments showing that human influence extended throughout 90% of inhabited space within 5 years of the war's conclusion. The expansion had been achieved without major battles or forced occupations. Instead, humans had simply identified what other species needed, and then provided those services more efficiently than anyone else could manage. But underlying all human, civilian activities was the knowledge that Earth possessed military capabilities that could eliminate any threat completely and permanently. The galaxy had seen human forces destroy an enemy that had defeated every other civilization for 3 centuries. No one wanted to discover what would happen if humans decided that another species represented a threat to galactic stability. The new order was not based on fear alone, but fear was certainly part of the foundation. Species cooperated with human initiatives partly because those initiatives were beneficial, but also because the alternatives were too dangerous to consider. Humanity had demonstrated that they viewed problems in terms of permanent solutions, rather than temporary accommodations. Ambassador Ray concluded her final report to Earth Command by noting that the galaxy had achieved a level of peace and stability that had not existed for centuries. Trade flourished under human protection, while scientific research advanced rapidly with access to human technology and methods. The elimination of existential threats allowed civilizations to focus on growth and development rather than survival. But the peace existed because everyone understood the rules of the new galactic order. Humans would protect and support species that The journey beyond the galactic rim took human forces into regions of space where reality itself became unreliable and dangerous. Commander Chris led the massive fleet from her flagship, while exotic physics specialists worked around the clock to keep their experimental drive systems functioning in areas where the normal laws of space and time no longer applied consistently. The first major obstacle appeared when the human fleet reached the edge of normal space where gravitational forces from distant galaxies created permanent distortions in the fabric of reality. Ships that moved too quickly found themselves scattered across multiple dimensions, while vessels that maintained standard orbital mechanics simply ceased to exist when they encountered pockets of reversed causality. Captain soon commanded the advanced scouting force that mapped safe passage routes through regions where time moved backward and space folded in on itself. Her navigation team used instruments that measured probability fluctuations rather than distance or direction, while her engineers constantly adjusted their ship's dimensional alignment to avoid being torn apart by competing physical laws. The swarm's central intelligence resided in a structure that defied every known principle of engineering and physics. It existed simultaneously in 7 different dimensions, drawing power from collapsing black holes and feeding on the quantum foam that underlies all reality. The structure was larger than most solar systems, but most of its mass existed in spatial dimensions that human instruments could barely detect. Admiral Min coordinated the assault from a command ship positioned at what the navigation computers claimed was a safe distance from the target. But safety was a relative concept in this region of space where attacking the enemy required weapons that could damage the fundamental structure of existence itself. Every shot fired risked creating cascading failures that might unravel local reality completely. The battle began when human forces deployed gravitational weapons that created artificial black holes designed to consume specific sections of the enemy structure. The swarm's defenses responded by manipulating space-time to redirect the artificial singularities back toward human ships while simultaneously launching attacks that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Human engineering teams had prepared for exactly this kind of exotic warfare by developing weapon systems that other species would have considered impossible or insane. They fired projectiles that moved backward through time to hit targets before the shots were actually taken. They deployed energy beams that followed curved paths through higher dimensions to bypass conventional defensive systems. Major Yun led boarding parties equipped with weapons and protective gear designed for combat in environments where physics operated according to rules that changed from moment to moment. Her soldiers carried guns that fired solid matter antimatter hybrid projectiles while wearing armor that existed partially outside normal space to avoid being affected by dimensional distortions. The fighting inside the swarm's central structure was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Human soldiers advanced through corridors where gravity pointed in random directions, while enemy defenders phased in and out of visible reality. Traditional military tactics were useless in spaces where straight lines curved back on themselves and where cause and effect operated in reverse order. But humans adapted to impossible conditions with the same methodical approach they brought to conventional warfare. When energy weapons proved ineffective against enemies that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, they switched to kinetic weapons that could damage targets regardless of which dimension they occupied. When conventional explosives failed to work in reverse time fields, they used chemical compounds that became more unstable when exposed to temporal anomalies. The climax of the battle came when Sergeant Sun led a small team into the core of the enemy intelligence, where biological neural networks spanning thousands of kilometers coordinated swarm activities across the entire galaxy. The chamber existed in a state of constant dimensional flux, with gravity fields that shifted every few seconds and atmospheric conditions that cycled through every possible combination of elements. Sun's team carried the biological weapon that human scientists had spent months developing specifically for this mission. The viral agent was designed to spread through quantum communication networks faster than light itself, attacking the specific molecular structures that allowed the swarm intelligence to maintain contact with its distributed components throughout the galaxy. Deploying the weapon required getting close enough to the central neural core to introduce the biological agent directly into the enemy's quantum communication system. This meant fighting through defensive systems that included creatures existing partially outside normal reality, and weapons that attack targets by erasing them from history rather than simply destroying their physical form. The final approach to the target was accomplished using equipment that pushed human technology beyond anything previously attempted. Sun soldiers wore powered armor that maintained local fields of stable physics while carrying weapons that fired concentrated packets of entropy designed to cause massive system failures in any complex structure they encountered. The moment of deployment came when Sun personally inserted the biological weapon into a neural junction point that connected the central intelligence to communication networks spanning millions of light years. The viral agent spread through quantum channels, instantaneously attacking every node in the swarm's distributed consciousness and systematically dismantling millions of years of evolutionary development. The effect was visible across the entire galaxy as swarm forces simply stopped functioning when their controlling intelligence dissolved into chaos. Ships that had been attacking planets for decades went dark and drifted powerlessly through space. Ground forces that had been consuming civilizations for centuries collapsed as their coordination networks failed. Completely human monitoring stations throughout the galaxy recorded the moment when an entire species ceased to exist. The readings showed quantum communication networks shutting down in cascading failures that spread faster than light itself. Within 6 hours of deployment, the biological weapon had eliminated every trace of the collective intelligence that had controlled swarm forces for millions of years. Captain Zhang commanded one of the observation ships that recorded the final moments of the enemy intelligence. His instruments detected massive energy releases as the central structure collapsed in on itself, creating spatial distortions that would take centuries to stabilize. The explosion was visible from distances measured in millions of light years as reality itself readjusted to fill the void left by the enemy's destruction. The human fleet began its return journey to normal space, carrying sensor records that documented the complete elimination of the galaxy's greatest threat. But they also carried the knowledge that human military technology had reached levels that made them potentially more dangerous than any enemy they might face in the future. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity had not simply won a defensive war against an existential threat. They had demonstrated capabilities that established them as the ultimate arbiters of galactic survival, with weapons and methods that no other species could match or counter. Lieutenant Day made the discovery that changed everything during what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission deep in swarm-controlled territory. His stealth ship had been monitoring a massive alien structure that appeared to be some kind of breeding facility when his sensors detected something that made him call for immediate backup from Earth. Command. The facility was not just producing new swarm units as human intelligence had assumed. It was coordinating the activities of swarm forces across hundreds of star systems using quantum communication networks that operated faster than light itself. Every swarm ship, every weapon, every tactical decision was being controlled by a central intelligence that existed somewhere beyond the edge of known space. Sergeant Yan analyzed the data from Day's reconnaissance mission and realized that the entire galaxy had been fighting the wrong enemy for 300 years. The individual swarm ships that attacked planets and consumed civilizations were not independent creatures. They were extensions of a single massive organism that had spread across space over millions of years using methods that no one understood. Human scientists worked for 72 hours straight to map the quantum communication networks that connected every swarm unit to their central controlling intelligence. Dr. Hay led a team of researchers who had been studying alien technology since the war began, and their conclusion was both shocking and terrifying. The Void Swarm was not a species or an army. It was a single creature that thought and acted as one unified consciousness. Every battle the galaxy had fought against the swarm had been like trying to kill someone by attacking their fingernails. The real enemy was hidden somewhere in the vast emptiness between galaxies where it had been growing and learning for longer than most stars had existed. Until that central intelligence was destroyed, the swarm could rebuild and adapt no matter how many individual units were eliminated. General Min called an emergency meeting of human military leaders from across Earth's sphere of influence. The strategic implications were clear and brutal. Conventional warfare could never eliminate the swarm, because the enemy's true form was beyond the reach of normal military operations. Victory required locating and destroying something that existed in regions of space where reality itself became unstable. Admiral Chris presented the tactical analysis that human planners had been developing since Day's discovery. The central swarm intelligence was located approximately 2 million light-years beyond the galactic rim, in a region where space-time distortions made normal travel impossible. Reaching it would require experimental technology that pushed the boundaries of physics, and weapons powerful enough to damage the fundamental structure of reality. The plan that emerged from these meetings was the most ambitious military operation in galactic history. Human forces would construct a fleet of specially designed vessels capable of surviving in regions where the normal laws of physics broke down. These ships would be equipped with experimental weapons systems that could attack enemy targets existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the most controversial aspect of the plan involved biological warfare on a scale that terrified even human military leaders. Dr. Jung had been working on viral agents designed to attack the quantum networks that connected swarm units to their central intelligence. The virus would spread through subspace, faster than light itself, systematically shutting down the enemy's ability to coordinate their forces. The weapon was potentially more dangerous than anything ever developed by any species in galactic history. Once released, it would spread throughout the swarm's entire network, killing millions of creatures across thousands of star systems within hours. There would be no way to control or limit its effects and no possibility of calling it back once the attack began. Captain Soon raised the obvious concern during the final planning session. Using biological weapons of such devastating scope would establish a precedent that could threaten every form of life in the galaxy. Future enemies might develop similar weapons and use them against human targets or innocent civilian populations throughout known space. General Hayes' response demonstrated the cold logic that had made human military forces so effective against every enemy they encountered. The immediate threat to galactic survival outweighed hypothetical future risks. The swarm had to be eliminated completely and permanently, regardless of what precedents that elimination might establish for future conflicts. The debate continued for days as human leaders weighed the moral implications of using weapons that could potentially destroy entire species with a single deployment. But the arguments always returned to the same fundamental point. Half measures had failed for 3 centuries. Elegant solutions had been tried and found inadequate. Only total warfare could achieve total victory. Lieutenant Yun presented intelligence reports showing that several galactic civilizations were secretly negotiating with swarm representatives, hoping to save themselves by offering other species as sacrifices. The Altarian government had already agreed to provide the locations of human colonies in exchange for promises that their homeworld would be spared from future attacks. This intelligence eliminated any remaining doubts about the necessity of extreme measures. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations were willing to betray their allies rather than risk everything in a fight for mutual survival. Under these circumstances, humans could not afford to limit their response based on moral considerations that their enemies clearly did not share. Major Tay coordinated the construction of humanity's ultimate weapon in secret facilities hidden throughout human-controlled space. The biological agent was engineered to target the specific quantum signatures that allowed swarm units to maintain contact with their central intelligence. Once infected, the enemy's communication networks would collapse, causing system-wide failures throughout their entire civilization. But creating the weapon was only the first challenge. Delivering it to the target required technology that existed at the very edge of human understanding. The ships designed for this mission incorporated experimental drives that could move through dimensions where normal matter could not exist, and weapon systems that attacked targets by manipulating the basics, forces that held reality together. Admiral Yuna commanded the final preparations from her flagship in orbit around Earth, while similar operations proceeded in star systems throughout human space. 12,000 ships, representing the largest military force ever assembled by any species, prepared for a mission that would either save the galaxy or establish humans as its most dangerous inhabitants. The galaxy watched these preparations with growing alarm as they realized that human military capabilities extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. Earth had been building weapons and ships in secret for decades, developing technologies that other species had considered impossible or too dangerous to pursue. When the human fleet finally departed for regions beyond known space, they carried enough firepower to destroy entire star systems and enough experimental technology to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in local areas of space-time. They were embarking on a mission that would demonstrate whether human methods could achieve what 3 centuries of conventional warfare had failed to accomplish. News of human military victories spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest ships could travel. Species that had never heard of Earth suddenly found themselves studying human history with growing alarm, while their best military minds tried to understand how such a primitive civilization could succeed where the most advanced cultures had failed completely. The Alterian High Command called an emergency session to analyze human combat footage. Supreme Admiral Zeth watched the recordings of human ships destroying swarm fleets and felt something he had never experienced in 3 centuries of military service. Fear not of the enemy they were fighting, but of the allies who had come to help them win. Dr. Mina found herself briefing alien commanders who had spent lifetimes studying warfare according to principles that seemed meaningless when applied to human tactics. She explained human military doctrine with the clinical precision of a scientist describing laboratory procedures. Humans did not view combat as a contest between opposing forces following established rules. They viewed it as a problem requiring the most efficient solution, regardless of cost, tradition, or collateral damage. The fundamental difference became clear when Mina showed the alien officers human training videos. Other species prepared for war by teaching their soldiers about honor, courage, and sacrifice. Human military training focused on target identification, resource allocation, and mission completion. Human soldiers were taught to eliminate threats using whatever methods achieved results most quickly and completely. Colonel Bora demonstrated human tactical thinking to a group of shocked Corvan generals. She used simple diagrams to show how humans approached strategic problems, where other species tried to outmaneuver their enemies or exploit technological advantages. Humans calculated the minimum force required to achieve total victory and then applied 3 times that amount to guarantee success. The Corvan officers could not understand this approach. General Vex had commanded armies for 200 years, and he had always believed that efficient resource use was the mark of superior strategy. But Bora explained that humans measured efficiency differently. They considered any battle that left enemy forces capable of future resistance to be a failure, regardless of how few resources had been expended. When the Corvan general asked about minimizing civilian casualties, Bora's response sent chills through the entire briefing room. Humans calculated acceptable losses based on strategic necessity, not moral considerations. If eliminating a threat required destroying civilian infrastructure, then the infrastructure would be destroyed. If victory required sacrificing population centers, then those sacrifices would be made without hesitation. The galaxy began receiving detailed reports from every system where human forces had engaged void swarm units. Intelligence analysts from dozens of species studied the same tactical patterns with growing unease. Human commanders did not adapt their strategies based on enemy actions. They identified the enemy's maximum possible capabilities and then prepared enough firepower to overcome those capabilities even if the enemy never actually deployed them. Captain Soon had eliminated an entire swarm nest using gravitational weapons that collapsed the local space-time structure. When asked about the environmental damage, her response was matter-of-fact. The alternative was allowing the nest to produce more swarm units, which would eventually threaten human interests. Therefore, destroying the nest was the logical choice. Regardless of secondary effects, the most disturbing aspect of human warfare was not their willingness to use weapons that other species considered too dangerous or destructive. It was their systematic approach to developing new weapons specifically designed to exploit enemy weaknesses. Human research teams studied every swarm engagement, and within days they would deploy new technologies, specifically calibrated to counter whatever adaptations the enemy had developed. Major Yun commanded a research vessel that followed human battle fleets collecting samples from destroyed swarm ships. Her team would analyze the wreckage, identify ways the enemy had tried to defend against human weapons, and then design more effective weapons that could overcome those defenses. The process was repeated after every engagement, creating an endless cycle of escalation that always favored human forces. The Nexus Empire had survived for millions of years by avoiding conflicts that could not be won through diplomatic means or overwhelming technological superiority. Emperor Valdris summoned his council of ancient advisors to analyze the human approach to warfare, and their conclusion was unanimous. Humans represented a threat potentially greater than the Void Swarm itself. Ambassador Ray received formal protests from 17 different species demanding that humans limit their military operations to avoid disrupting established interstellar law. Her response was delivered through official diplomatic channels with the same cold efficiency that characterized human military actions. Earth recognized no authority higher than its own national interests and would continue operations until all threats to human security had been permanently eliminated. The protests grew louder. When human forces began using biological weapons against swarm installations, Dr. Jung had developed viral agents specifically designed to target swarm organic components, causing systemic failures throughout their technological networks. The weapons were incredibly effective, but they also violated every treaty governing biological warfare that had been established over the previous 1,000 years. When confronted about these treaty violations, Jung's explanation was simple and terrifying. Earth had never signed those treaties because humans had not been considered advanced enough to participate in galactic governance. Therefore, human forces were not bound by restrictions they had played no role in creating. They would use whatever weapons achieved mission objectives most efficiently. Galaxy realized that their greatest fear was not that humans would lose the war against the Void Swarm. Their greatest fear was that humans would win and then turn their systematic approach to problem-solving toward other challenges, including species that had previously dismissed them as primitive newcomers. Lieutenant Chris filed intelligence reports showing that human manufacturing capacity was expanding exponentially as their war machine adapted to galactic-scale operations. Shipyards throughout human space were producing vessels designed for extended interstellar campaigns, while research facilities developed weapon systems that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The aliens began to understand that they had made a fundamental error in their assessment of human civilization. They had measured human advancement by comparing human technology to their own sophisticated systems. But they had failed to recognize that humans approached technological development with the same ruthless efficiency they brought to warfare. Human technology was not elegant or sophisticated by galactic standards, but it was incredibly effective, and it could be mass-produced using resources that other species would never consider exploiting. Humans strip-mined entire asteroids to build single warships, and they considered this normal resource allocation for military purposes. The galaxy had asked for human help in defeating the Void Swarm, but they were beginning to realize they might have traded one existential threat for another potentially greater one. The emergency session in Earth's Global Defense Council lasted 18 hours without a single break. Representatives from every human nation sat around the massive circular table, while holographic displays showed the true scale of the galactic crisis. General Tay had been preparing for this moment his entire career, but even he was shocked by how quickly everything moved once the decision was made. Within 6 hours of receiving the Council's desperate message, every major military installation on Earth had switched to full war production. Factories that had been making civilian goods for decades suddenly retooled to produce weapons designed specifically for fighting in the vacuum of space. Shipyards that had been building exploration vessels began constructing warships using designs that had been classified top secret for 50 years. Admiral Yuna commanded the largest fleet in human history from her flagship above Earth's moon. 2,000 ships that had been hidden in deep space installations throughout the solar system came together for the first time. They were not beautiful like alien vessels with their curved hulls and glowing energy trails. Human ships looked like enormous metal boxes covered in armor plating and weapon systems that stuck out at harsh angles. But appearances meant nothing to humans. Function was everything. Each human warship carried enough firepower to level entire cities, and enough armor to survive direct nuclear hits. They were built with one purpose in mind: to get close to the enemy and destroy everything within range, using the most effective weapons possible, regardless of how primitive they might seem to sophisticated alien observers. Captain June led the advance fleet through the jump gates that connected human space to the war zone. His ship, the Iron Fist, carried weapons that made alien military experts shake their heads in disbelief. Nuclear missiles that created miniature stars where they exploded. Kinetic cannons that fired solid metal rods at nearly the speed of light. Chemical weapons that could eat through alien hull materials in minutes. The strategy was pure human engineering. While other species had spent centuries developing weapons that were efficient, elegant, and sophisticated, humans had focused on weapons that were simple, reliable, and absolutely destructive. A nuclear warhead did not need to be programmed or calibrated or adjusted for different enemy types. It just needed to explode with enough force to vaporize everything nearby. The first real test came near the outer edge of Corvin space, where a void swarm fleet was slowly consuming a mining station. The alien defenders had been fighting for 3 weeks using their advanced plasma weapons and energy shields. They had managed to slow the swarm advance, but they could not stop it. Every day more of their ships were infected and turned against them. June's fleet arrived just as the Corvin commander was preparing to evacuate the last survivors. The aliens watched in amazement as the crude human ships formed a simple battle line and opened fire without any attempt at communication or negotiation. There were no elegant maneuvers, no sophisticated targeting systems, no attempt to minimize collateral damage. The humans simply calculated the most efficient way to destroy every swarm ship in the system, and then did exactly that. They launched 3,000 missiles simultaneously, each one carrying enough nuclear explosive to crack a small moon. The missiles moved too fast for the swarm to adapt their defenses, and they were too numerous to shoot down with point defense systems. When the explosions finally stopped 6 hours later, there was nothing left in the system except expanding clouds of radioactive gas and debris. The swarm ships that had been slowly overwhelming Corvin defenses for weeks had been completely eliminated in less than a day. But the cost in raw materials and energy had been enormous. The humans had expended more resources in one battle than most alien civilizations used in entire years of warfare. The Corvin survivors could not understand what they had witnessed. Admiral Thek had commanded fleets for 2 centuries, and he had never seen warfare conducted with such brutal efficiency. The humans had not tried to capture enemy ships or preserve valuable technology or minimize damage to the surrounding space. They had simply identified everything that needed to be destroyed and then destroyed it using overwhelming force. But the most disturbing part was how casually the humans discussed their victory. Colonel Bora explained their tactical thinking to the Corvin officers with the same tone she might use to describe a routine training exercise. The swarm had been eliminated because that was the mission objective. The resource expenditure was acceptable because they had achieved complete success without losing a single human life. Dr. Mina began her briefing to alien military commanders by explaining the fundamental difference between human and galactic approaches to warfare. Other species treated combat as a specialized activity, requiring years of training and sophisticated equipment. Humans treated warfare as an industrial process that could be scaled up or down depending on the size of the problem they needed to solve. When humans decided to eliminate a threat, they did not send their best warriors or their most advanced weapons. They sent enough firepower to guarantee success regardless of what the enemy might do in response. If destroying one enemy ship required 10 nuclear warheads, then humans would use 50 warheads to make sure the job was done properly. The galaxy began receiving reports from every system where human forces had engaged void swarm units. The pattern was always the same. Human ships would arrive, study the tactical situation for exactly as long as needed to plan their attack, and then proceed to eliminate every enemy unit using the most direct method possible. There were no heroic duels between enemy commanders, no desperate last stands, no miraculous escapes or unexpected plot twists, just systematic, efficient destruction carried out by soldiers who viewed their job as a technical problem, requiring a technical solution. Lieutenant Day filed his combat report with the same matter-of-fact tone he used for routine maintenance schedules. Swarm resistance had been heavier than expected, so his unit had requested additional nuclear support. The bombardment had continued until sensor readings confirmed complete elimination of all enemy forces. Mission accomplished, casualties 0, resources expended within acceptable parameters. The alien commanders reading these reports realized they were seeing something entirely new in galactic warfare. Humans did not fight for glory or honor, or to prove their superiority. They fought to solve problems, and they measured success by how completely and permanently those problems were eliminated. The galaxy was beginning to understand why the Council had been Wrong to dismiss humans as primitive. They were not primitive, they were focused on results rather than methods, and their results were becoming impossible for anyone to ignore. The massive space station called Council Prime was in total chaos. Alien beings from hundreds of different worlds ran through the metal corridors, carrying data tablets and shouting orders in dozens of languages. The great war room that had seen 300 years of peaceful meetings was now filled with desperate military commanders staring at holographic displays showing one terrible truth. The Void Swarm was winning. Commander Hana sat in her small observation post on the very edge of council space, watching all this panic through intercepted communications. She was human, and humans were not part of the Galactic Council. Earth was too new, too primitive, the Council had said. While other species traveled between stars using exotic energy drives, humans still used simple chemical rockets. While aliens fought with weapons made of pure light, humans still fired metal bullets from crude guns. But Hana had been watching this war for 20 years, and she knew something the great alien minds had missed. The Void Swarm was not just another enemy army. It was something that ate civilizations from the inside out. Every time the Council forces tried to fight it with their advanced technology, the Swarm learned and adapted. Energy shields that had protected worlds for centuries became useless overnight. Laser weapons that could cut through. Mountains bounced harmlessly off swarm ships. After the first few battles, the Alterian fleet had been the pride of the galaxy with their crystal ships that could bend space itself around them. Hana watched their final transmission 3 days ago. Admiral Zier had been screaming into his communicator as black tentacles wrapped around his flagship. The crystal hull that should have been indestructible cracked like glass. The Alterian technology that had taken 50,000 years to develop was consumed in minutes. Then came the Corvan war machines. These aliens had turned warfare into an art form with plasma cannons that burned hotter than stars, and armor that could survive direct hits from asteroids. General Thox had led 2 million Corvan soldiers into battle against a swarm nest near the galactic core. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Corvan military ceased to exist. Their plasma weapons had been turned against them, their own armor used to trap them inside burning metal tombs. The ancient Nexus Empire had tried next. These beings were older than most stars, and they possessed technology that could manipulate time itself. Emperor Valdris had sent his time ships to prevent the swarm from ever reaching critical star systems. The strategy was perfect in theory. Attack the enemy before they could attack you. But when the Nexus fleets arrived in the past, they found the swarm already waiting for them. Somehow the enemy had learned to see through time as easily as looking through clear glass. Hana made notes on all these failures while her fellow humans on Earth prepared for something the galaxy had never seen. While other species developed increasingly sophisticated weapons to fight the swarm, humans had been studying the enemy with the cold logic of scientists examining bacteria under microscopes. They did not care about honor in battle or following ancient warfare traditions. They only cared about finding ways to kill the enemy completely. The breakthrough came when human researchers realized that all the galaxy's advanced civilizations were making the same mistake. They were trying to fight the swarm using the same principles that governed their peacetime technology. Energy efficiency, elegant design, minimal resource waste. These were wonderful concepts for building peaceful societies, but they were terrible ideas for fighting a war against something that wanted to devour everything. Captain Chris had been monitoring Council communications when the message finally came. It was transmitted on every frequency and every language the Council knew. The Great Galactic Assembly was formally requesting military assistance from any species willing to help, even those not officially recognized as members. Even humans. The message was not just desperate, it was humiliating. For 3 centuries, the Council had maintained that only the most advanced civilizations deserved to guide galactic affairs. Species were ranked by their technological achievements, their cultural sophistication, their adherence to peaceful principles. Humans had failed every test. They were too violent, too primitive, too willing to solve problems through brute force rather than elegant solutions. But now the elegant solutions had failed. The sophisticated technology had been corrupted. The peaceful principles had led to the edge of galactic extinction. The Council was ready to try something they had never considered before. Perhaps the primitive, violent humans might know something about fighting that the advanced species had forgotten. Hana smiled as she forwarded the Council's message to Earth Command. She had been waiting for this moment since the war began. Not because she wanted to see alien civilizations suffer, but because she knew humans possessed something that the rest of the galaxy lacked. They understood that sometimes survival required abandoning every civilized principle and embracing the brutal logic of total war. Other species fought to prove their superiority or defend their honor. Humans fought to eliminate problems permanently. When humans went to war, they did not seek glorious victories or honorable defeats. They sought the complete destruction of anything that threatened their existence. The galaxy was about to learn the difference between fighting for glory and fighting for survival. The Void Swarm had adapted to every sophisticated weapon in the galaxy's arsenal, but they had never encountered weapons designed by a species that viewed war not as an art form, but as a problem requiring the most direct solution possible. They had never faced an enemy that measured success not by how elegantly they fought, but by how completely they eliminated their opponents. Earth's response to the Council's plea was already being prepared in hidden military bases across human space. Ships that looked like ugly metal boxes compared to the flowing beauty of alien designs. Weapons that seemed almost primitive next to energy-based arms that could reshape matter itself. But these crude human tools had one advantage that all the galaxy's sophistication could not match. They were designed by a species that had spent their entire evolutionary history learning to kill anything that threatened them. And now the humans were coming to teach the galaxy what that really meant.